Hey, everybody. Welcome to True Crime Wednesday. If you happen to be new to the channel, I'm Lori Hullis. I'm a retired defense attorney writing a book about the Vallow and Daybell case, which is how we all got to know one another. So welcome. And boy, there are some crazy things to talk about tonight. So first of all, I just want to say hello to everybody, and we'll take a little minute while folks are joining the chat. I'm going to remind everybody of a couple things. First of all, do not forget that this quilt, I always point the wrong direction, this quilt that is hanging on the wall behind my head is our True Crime Quilt that we did during our quilt along. And while we were waiting for Lori's trial, and it is available to be raffled. We're having a raffle. It's going on right now. You can join in and get a ticket by entering with that link at the bottom. I know it works. Some folks were saying they weren't sure how to access it, but it does work. That link gets you to the page where you can get a raffle ticket. So please join us. We are going to do the drawing on November 15th. Oh, I'm sorry, November 22nd, which is actually going to be our next live. So on November 22nd, we're going to draw a winner, and we're going to send that cute little quilt to you. We also are still working on a quilt project where I'm going to be providing a pattern and having folks create a quilt square in hopes that we'll have a quilt together to give to Larry and Kay at Chad's hearing in April. So I'll be getting more information out about that. I'm still working on getting access to the pattern I like. If I can't, then we'll be working on an alternative pattern. But essentially, it's an origami crane. And in Japanese culture, origami cranes mean peace. And they also have begun a tradition of folding 1,000 origami cranes in honor of someone who has died. So origami cranes have a lovely connotation for this quilt to be a memory quilt. So with that said, please, the link for the quilt raffle is in our, gosh, I'm fumbling tonight, is in our show notes. Please go there and join us for a chance to win this quilt. Also want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe to the channel. If you are new, please subscribe. Although we haven't been doing a lot of impromptu lives recently because I'm in the throes of writing a book, there will be some coming up, and certainly we'll be doing a lot more of that when Chad's trial starts in April. So I hope everybody had a great Halloween. We had a lot of fun. I went down and sat out on the driveway with our new neighbors down the street. Well, they're new because we're new to the neighborhood, and handed out candy. Carl stayed at home and corralled the dogs who love answering the door and handed out candy as well. And so we had a great time. Now here it is, the 1st of November. It is cold in Idaho. I am here to tell you, and it's supposed to be rainy tomorrow. So winter is upon us here in Idaho. And I've heard that it is really cold in a lot of other places. So if you happen to be in one of those chilly places, please stay warm and toasty. I wanted to say shout out to Jan Clark, who was on early. She and her husband Roy are followers. She said they just got back from Nashville and thought about going there next year to meet me. Well, I hope they're going to go and meet all of you, because let's remember that we're going to be doing a book launch at CRIMECON in the end of May, 1st of June. The dates and the information are in our show notes at CRIMECON, which is going to be in Nashville this year. I've never been to Nashville, so I'm kind of looking forward to checking out Nashville and seeing what's available there. And we're going to launch pre-sales for the book. So I'm hoping that a lot of you will join us. We're going to be giving out swag. We're going to be doing some live events, and it's going to be super fun. So I hope everybody will join us. I've also talked to a couple of people about proposing to CrimeCon a panel that would deal with the Vallow case. So hopefully they'll take us up on it, and we'll be able to offer a presentation of people who've been involved and are experts on the case. So keep your eye out for that. And speaking of books, don't forget Mandy Matney from the Murdoch Murders podcast. It's now called True Crime, or True Sunlight, sorry. Her book comes out in a couple of weeks, and pre-sales mean the world to people. So if you have interest in the Murdoch case and Mandy's sort of meteoric rise to popularity around the case, please consider pre-ordering her book, because pre-orders really help authors. So thanks for that. We have some absolute insanity to talk about tonight. First of all, I want to talk about Vallow, because that's one of the things y'all are interested in, and that we all, our common story that we all started with. And one of the reasons I want to talk about that is because we also need to talk about Blaze Tibido and that interesting situation. So if you haven't heard about that, it's pretty juicy too. So remember, Lori, the governor of Idaho finally signed the extradition order for Lori. So at some point, probably within the next month or so, she's going to be transported to Arizona. Now, unless they decide that for security reasons they need to fly her, she will be on the transport circuit. And I am here to tell you, it is absolute misery. They're going to put her on a bus. Think not luxury motor coach with a nice bathroom in the back. Think Con Air, or the bus out of The Fugitive, right? Harrison Ford on the bus. Think cages and uncomfortable seats and old rehabbed school buses. And they put these folks on the bus, and they head off in a circuit. Now, depending on what point in the circuit she gets picked up, because this transportation circuit goes all over the West. So depending on where she gets picked up in the transportation circuit, she could be on that bus for a long time. And that bus stops at every small town jail, every prison, all the way along their circuit. When they stop at night, they stop and they stay overnight in a jail or prison in cells. And so every night they have to be processed into a new facility, which means they have to be strip searched, body cavity searched. It is a really unpleasant process. And it means that, and it takes a long time because they stop everywhere. So if they decide that she's going to be transported like any other prisoner, it's likely that she could be in for a really long and uncomfortable trip. It is not going to be airlines and the governor sending his plane for her like it was when she came back from Hawaii. So now they could decide that it's worth it the state of Arizona could decide it's worth it for security reasons for them to fly her, and that would make some sense too. But remember, if that's the case, then she would fly with at least 2 law enforcement officers. She would fly handcuffed and shackled, and probably not going to be a whole lot more comfortable than if she's on a bus somewhere. So, we haven't heard much more about Chad's trial. I'd heard some rumors that there were still settlement negotiations going on. I still think that if Chad was smart, he would pursue a settlement so that he's not facing the death penalty. If there were a settlement that could take the death penalty off for him, I sure, if I were his lawyer, would be really encouraging him strongly to do that. But nobody ever said Chad was the brightest bulb on the string. And I think that he's still a true believer. And I think that he still feels that that if he did not hands-on commit the murders, that he's innocent. I don't know. But I haven't heard anything recently that would give me the idea that perhaps a plea is coming. Now, he could plead guilty all the way up until his trial in April. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes as we get on, particularly through the holidays. Court is hard during the holidays. Judges take off time, lawyers take off time, dockets slow down. And so the period between Thanksgiving and Christmas is very difficult to get a whole lot done in any big chunk. Getting small things on the docket's one thing, but getting a big motion heard or any of those things, kind of hard to say whether that will happen or not. Now, there is a hearing on the 28th of November. I think that's right. I don't think I have that mixed up with Koberger because I've been following both of them. But the hearing coming up will be about cameras in the courtroom. I'm beginning to think that there is a chance the judge is going to allow Chad's trial to be live streamed. The reason I say that is because his counsel has said they want the trial live streamed. They believe, as most defense attorneys do, that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and they want his trial to be live streamed. So I think that is going to be persuasive for the judge. One of the reasons that he gave for ordering that Lori's trial not be live streamed and continuing to deny that happening was because Chad's trial was still coming up, and he was concerned about impacting Chad's jury pool. So he doesn't have that argument now, and so I think it's quite possible that in November he may rule in favor of having cameras in the courtroom, which would be great, would be exciting, and I think everyone would get a much better idea of how that trial progressed. We have a better idea of how Lori's trial was presented. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I'm hoping I might be able to go, although it is right around Thanksgiving, and so I may just skip it. The weather is not that great traveling back and forth between Boise and Rexburg that time of year. So I'm sort of playing that one by ear. But this does roll into this most recent case, and the case is Blaze Tibido. So this is a family who, and I'm looking at my phone, I'm looking at the article because I want to get it right for you. This is a family from Gilbert, Arizona. Does that sound familiar? Now, I think I have said before, the area around Gilbert, Chandler, Mesa, which are all suburbs with they literally run into one another into one sort of big blob. Um, and that they are a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona. And there is a substantial LDS population in that area, particularly Mesa was one of the early enclaves of LDS people who left Salt Lake because of the church coming down with their manifesto and forbidding polygamy. A lot of polygamous families then moved to Arizona because it was not yet a state. Arizona was the last state to become a state, other than Hawaii and Alaska. And then a lot of them then made the jump across the border into Mexico, where there's there's also and still a large polygamist enclave there. So that really has nothing to do with the Tibidos in particular. However, there is a large LDS population there, and there is a temple in Mesa Gilbert area. So, and Lori was from Gilbert as well. We don't have any indication that they knew that these folks knew Lori Vallow or had any contact with her or Charles. At least not at this point. We don't know. And but a few days ago, let me make sure I get this right. Spring. Now, figure this out. This woman's name is Spring. Her brother's name is Brooke. And her son's name is Blaze. Okay. So Spring Tibido, her brother Brooke, and her daughter Abby, whose last name is Snarr, Snarr. By the way, Nate Eaton of East Idaho News has been covering this very, very broadly. So if you, and much more in depth, so if you have interest in this, you definitely go and check out Nate's YouTube broadcasts about this. So Abby, who is a young married woman, she's 23. She and her husband have been married a brief amount of time, a couple years. And Abby comes home, and actually, Abby calls her husband and says, "Hey, I'm not feeling well, and I need you to come home and take me to the ER." He gets home and discovers that that was a ruse, and that in fact, she and her mother and her uncle are all packing. She's been down to the local Sportsman Warehouse and bought a bunch of camping gear and a bunch of camo gear and a bunch of survival gear, and they're all packing. And Abby says to her husband, "We have a ticket for you. We're all going to the airport. We're flying to Boise, where the uncle, Brooke, was going to pick them up at the airport." And he says, "I'm not really sure I want to do that." She says, "Oh no, this is the call out's coming. We need to go. We need to head for the hills and hide in the mountains because the tribulation is coming, and now is the time." So Abby's husband, whose name I haven't come across yet, is a little bit more skeptical and says, "I'm not so sure that's a great idea. And I don't think it's time. And I don't think I want to lose my job. And I'm not doing that." So he declines. And then Abby and her mother take her 16-year-old brother, Blaze Tibido, and they all get on an airplane at the airport in Phoenix, and they fly to Boise, where their uncle, Brooke Hale, picks them up, and they head out. And they head out um, into parts unknown. Well, Spring's husband, who is Blaze and Abby's father, Ben, is deeply concerned. He and Spring have been separated. He's deeply concerned that they have taken Blaze because he doesn't believe that Blaze believes any of these things that they believe. Now, what do they believe? Well, she is a huge supporter of Julie Rowe. Where did Julie Rowe get those ideas? John Pontius and Visions of Glory. So last week we talked about the fact that we had Tim Ballard, who was reading Visions of Glory and was involved with Tom Harrison, who was the author, who was the person that John Pontius called Spencer in the book. Tom Harrison is the one who's had all these visions of end times. We talked about the fact that Jody Hildebrand has appeared. Tom Harrison is a therapist, an LDS therapist. He's appeared on panels with Jody Hildebrand. He's trained lots of LDS therapists. And so this Visions of Glory book, which claims that Spencer, who is Tom Harrison, had all of these near-death experiences that caused him to have visions of the end times. And they're all of these folks are hooked on this end time philosophy from Visions of Glory. It's what spawned Julie Rowe. It's what spawned Eric Smith and some of his investigations. He was a close friend of Chad Daybell's. It's been reported that Chad and Lori met with Tom Harrison. We know because we've seen the footage when they serve Lori Vallow with the order to produce her children. She's sitting around a swimming pool in Hawaii, and she's reading Visions of Glory. She turns it upside down to hold her place when the police walk up. You can see the cover of the book. So we know that this Visions of Glory book and these end time philosophies go well beyond Chad and Lori. There seems to be a movement within the LDS Church of these beliefs. So now we have this family, including the Tibidos and the Snars and Uncle Brooke Hale, all headed out into the wilderness. Now, the interesting thing about this is these folks, from all reports, are not the outdoorsy type. They're not the kind of folks who have headed out, who go camping and who know how to take care of themselves in the wilderness. They are greenhorns, which is interesting when you find out where they went. So the father in this case, Ben, he is frantic because they have taken his 16-year-old son. He adamantly believes that his son would not have gone voluntarily. He adamantly believes that there's no way that this boy believes this stuff from Visions of Glory or the things that his mother and aunt are saying. He says he's a normal kid. He's not going to leave his girlfriend. He's playing high school football. They're in the middle of the season. He's not going to leave his football team. It's just, this makes no sense. Well, but they can't find them. They look all over, they're trying to locate them in the Phoenix area and they can't find them. They don't know where they've gone. They begin to wonder whether or not they have crossed they look for them in the Boise area. They begin to wonder whether they've crossed into Oregon or not. They've got some sort of clue that perhaps they've gone into Oregon. And lo and behold, they intercept them at the Canadian border. And they discover that they are on their way to Alaska to hide in the mountains and to wait out the tribulation. Well, I'm telling you what, today is November 1st. Alaska is nowhere that you want to be going this time of year. You don't want to be driving across Canada to get to Alaska, and Alaska is not anywhere you want to be going this time of year, particularly if you are not prepared. So their lives were probably saved by the fact that they were intercepted at the Canadian border. What we know at this point is that Blaze has been returned. His father went to court and got an emergency custody order. So presumably Blaze has been returned to his dad. And he has, and there have been charges filed against the mother and the uncle. And according to this, they've been charged with 4 felonies, including conspiracy to commit custodial interference and custodial interference. And interestingly enough, when Ben filed for custody, his emergency custody documents actually mention the Vallow Daybell case and say that she believes that Spring believed that she was a chosen prophetess. Or who does that sound like? And the group's belief that they're a super elite chosen status as messenger of the last days. That sounds sort of familiar, doesn't it? And then also they believe that that Blaze was a Davidic servant. Now, from what I understand, and I'm not an expert, so y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that a Davidic servant is also what Joseph Smith called the one mighty and strong. And that was the person who was supposed to come and, I don't know, for lack of a better description, restore the LDS church to its original purpose prior to the coming of Jesus. And that has to happen before Jesus can come back. So there have been many, many people who've claimed to be the one mighty and strong, from the Lafferty brothers to, let me see, who else? The LeBarons in Mexico. So lots of people over the years have claimed to be the one mighty and strong. Warren Jeffs claimed that he was the one mighty and strong. So now we have yet another layer of this movement, which seems to be so much greater than just Lori and Chad. Lori and Chad seem to have been this tiny little sliver of a much greater movement. The interesting thing is that the people who are involved in this movement are just about one click away. I mean, if standard LDS doctrine is midnight, these folks are like 1201. They are not that far off of what doctrine that the mainstream church teaches. They are folks who really want to go back to the original teachings of Joseph Smith. They believe that the LDS church, as it is constituted now, is in apostasy, and that it is only those who are willing to go back to the historic teaching of Joseph Smith that will be exalted. So it's a very interesting, very seductive kind of idea. And it is particularly difficult if you are a person who has been indoctrinated for your whole life and inculcated for your whole life and maybe generations of your family into the church, because you exist in their bubble, in the cultural bubble, where all the people you know have all the people you know ascribe to the LDS faith, the people you work for, the people you work with, your significant others, the people you socialize with, everyone is on that same page in that same bubble. And so these ideas become more palatable, more understandable, because that's your culture. So it's very interesting, and I think it bears a lot of watching and attention. Kathleen Smith points out that Mormon Stories Mormon Stories podcast with John DeLynn has done a great series on the influence of Tom Harrison. They are really good, and the links are actually in our show notes. They're excellent, excellent. There's a 3-part program that features Lauren Matthias, along with Megan Connor, who is Lori Vallow's cousin, and as well as Mindy. Y'all keep having to remind me of her last name because I keep forgetting it. But anyway, they put together a presentation with John DeLynn. It is excellent. John DeLynn has also done a 3-part series, interview series with Christopher Perrett's daughter and her husband. The reason it is such a good series is because Christopher Perrett owns the Avow platform, which is another voice of warning. And Avow is the organization that provides, it is a subscribe-only organization, so it's behind a paywall. And it provides a social media platform for people, like-minded people, for preppers. It is not entirely LDS, but predominantly LDS members. So the interview that John did with his daughter and her husband is absolutely fascinating. So please, Mindy Caldwell, why can I not remember that? Thank you very much, Amy. Mindy Caldwell. They did a great job. They put this presentation together with clips from the audiobook Visions of Glory. They put together, and they really connect the dots on how this philosophy is so, how it is attractive and romantic to folks, particularly in the church, and also how dangerous it is. So it's really fascinating. But the common denominator is Tom Harrison. He is Tom, Thom Harrison. He is a therapist. He is on most of the local, the LDS therapy recommendation lists, the referral lists that the church uses and church bishops use. And the common denominator is him. He's been on panels where he has spoken and taught with Jody Hildebrand. He is providing aftercare to victims of human trafficking that are rescued by Tim Ballard. He's met with Lori and Chad Daybell. He influenced Julie Rowe, and I'm certain had influence over this latest family with Spring and her family. And so it is really, I highly recommend that you take a look at that, that both of those 3-episode series on Mormon Stories. So with all of that to talk about, that is not even the craziest thing that we have to talk about. Because the craziest thing that we have to talk about is what's going on in both Markel Adelson, which is the trial that's going on in Florida right now, and in Delphi. So let's talk first of all about Markel. Now, I'm just going to do a really quick thumbnail on the history of this case. If you're interested, there are a couple of really good podcast series. One of them is called Over My Dead Body, I think, about the Markel case. And it is really fascinating. The case has been going on for quite some time. It began in 2014 and has been going on since, so almost 10 years. Dan Markel was a Harvard-trained law professor at Florida State University in Tallahassee. He was married to another lawyer whose name is Wendy Adelson. So Wendy and Dan were married, had 2 little boys, and Wendy then filed for divorce. She was done with the marriage. The other thing is Wendy grew up in a very tight-knit, very well-to-do family. Her father is a dentist who has a large practice in the Miami area that has several different locations. Her brother is a periodontist who has been sort of in and out of mom and dad, or in and out of dad's practice at times. He does very well for himself. And so they're very wealthy. So Dan and Wendy get married. As time goes on, they're both Jewish. But as time goes on, Dan is choosing to be much more observant and much more conservative in his faith than Wendy. And becomes a point of contention for them, along with a lot of other things. And Wendy files for divorce, and they divorce. The divorce is contentious from the beginning, but they managed to settle on a 50-50 parenting time with their boys, who are at the time of Dan Markel's death, 3 and 4 years old. Wendy announces to Dan that she wants to move from Tallahassee, which is in the northern part of Florida, all the way down to Miami. It's a long way. It's like 6 or 7 hours if you drive. And Dan Markel, of course, is a professor at FSU, so he's not really interested in moving. At one point, early in their relationship, early in their marriage, he applied for jobs in the Miami area at the law schools there, at the university, and didn't get hired. And so, but he's now been a law professor for a while. He has tenure, and he's pretty satisfied with what he's doing. But Wendy hates Tallahassee. As far as she's concerned, it is the backwater armpit of Florida. She hates it. She wants to go back to Miami, where all of her family are. And as I've said before, to say that they're close-knit is an overstatement. This family are so up in each other's business, it is crazy. But she has 2 brothers. And while it sounds kind of odd, she has one brother that's a periodontist, a dentist, and one that's a physician. The older brother, Rob, is a physician. So Rob meets a woman, and he tells his parents, I'm really serious about her. I want to marry her. And they're absolutely opposed to it. And they harass him forever about not marrying this woman. And the reason is she's not Jewish. So he finally breaks up with this woman. He meets somebody else, marries someone else because they're Jewish. He's very unhappy. And he finally goes to his parents and says, look, I'm divorcing. I'm going to marry the woman that I wanted to marry to begin with. And you guys are just going to have to get over it. So he now has a very estranged relationship with them because of that. On the flip side, Dan Markel seemed like the perfect husband for Wendy Adelson. He's Jewish, he's a lawyer, he's very successful, he's a college professor, he's very well respected, and everyone, her parents are very happy that he's a good choice. But when Wendy announces that she wants to move back to Miami out of Tallahassee after the divorce and take their children, Dan says, hang on, that's not going to work. We have 50-50 parenting time with the children, and I can't keep doing that if you're in Miami and I'm in Tallahassee. So Wendy files a action with the court asking for permission to relocate, and the judge denies it and says, no, sorry, but you're not going to uproot your kids to go to Miami. The next thing that happens is Dan Markel is gunned down in his driveway, in his car, in his driveway, by two Hispanic men. And the investigation takes a very long time. They finally catch a couple of breaks in the investigation. They identify the two men who were involved in the murder. And they say, we were hired. And they say, well, who hired you? And the law enforcement says, well, I don't know, but we got the money from Katie Meg Banowa. Katie is one of the guys' baby mama. And it just so happens that she was Charlie Adelson, the other brothers, the periodontist brothers' girlfriend. So now we have a connection. We have a connection between Charlie Adelson and the woman who set it all up and who relayed the money and relayed the information and was the go-between, and the gunman. One of the two gunmen pled guilty and agreed to assist the state. The other one went to trial. So Katie Meg Banowa and her baby daddy went to trial together. He was, his name is Sigfredo Garcia. He was convicted, but the jury hung on convicting her. So a third trial happened and she was tried and was convicted. So now all of those folks have been convicted, and then they arrested Charlie Adelson. And Charlie Adelson is currently on trial. So his attorney comes to court and says, well, we don't dispute that there was a murder, but we dispute that Charlie Adelson arranged it. Because at one point, Donna Adelson, Wendy and Charlie's mother, Donna and Harvey are their parents. Donna Adelson offered Dan Markel $1 million to let Wendy move back to Miami with the children. And there was discussion. Well, I'm not sure they ever made the offer to him, but they discussed making that offer to him. So now the defense says, well, Charlie ran his mouth about that to Katie Banowa, and Katie told Sigfredo. And so it wasn't a murder for hire. It was extortion, because they went and killed him and then said, either you give us money or we'll tell them that you hired us. The defense doesn't make any sense. And if you've seen any of the other trials, it doesn't hold together. It doesn't hold together even in this trial, but it's probably their best option. The really most fascinating thing about this case is it could be a tutorial on good lawyering. It is on trial practice. Both sides have done an outstanding job of conducting a trial. So if you really want to see like jaw-droppingly good lawyering, I highly recommend that you tune in, especially to the opening statements from both of these lawyers, because I think they both did a really good job. Now, the attorney, the prosecutor, this is her third her third swipe through this evidence, so she ought to be pretty good at it by now. But it is a really interesting trial to watch. So the prosecution puts on all their evidence. It's a very methodical case. One of the things that they put on are a bunch of wiretaps that they got, having to do with between Donna and Charlie and Charlie and Catherine Magbanua. So those are all interesting. They get a little tedious because they're a little hard to understand, but they're worth listening to. And then the prosecution rests today. So the defense takes over, and the judge says, well, are you going to put on witnesses? Now, if you remember in the Vallow trial, Lori Vallow's lawyers put on no witnesses. So he says, yes, Your Honor, we are going to put on witnesses. And he said, well, how many witnesses? Is it going to take the rest of the day? They sort of talk about the logistics of it. And he lets slip that his client is going to testify. So they put on Wendy Adelson's divorce lawyer to talk about the divorce negotiations and what the contention was around the divorce. I'm not sure she helped them all that much. But then the judge says, who's next? And the defense attorney says, my client is next. And the prosecution stands up and says, hang on, if he's going to testify, I don't want to chop up his testimony. If he's going to testify, I want to cross-examine him, and I don't want him to be able to take the whole night and get ready for my cross-examination, basically. We want it all to happen at once. So they adjourned early for today, and tomorrow morning, bright and early, Florida time, Charlie Adelson is going to take the stand, and it's going to be fascinating because he's going to have to get up there and say, no, it wasn't a murder for hire. Yes, they were extorting money from us. And that is just going to be a blatant lie. It isn't going to be a matter of being able to sort of do-si-do around the truth. He is going to have to get up and out lie. Now, the question is, did he tell his lawyer this cock and bull story about, oh, we never hired them, they extorted this money out of us? Or is his lawyer knowingly suborning perjury because he knows his client is going to get on the stand and lie? That is juicy. I mean, I have to give the lawyer the benefit of the doubt that he is not going to knowingly put his client on the stand when his client is going to get up and lie. So I have to give him the benefit of the doubt and say Charlie must have concocted this cock and bull story about how, it really was extortion. It wasn't really a murder for hire. So I don't know. The defense is going to be fascinating, and it is going to be absolutely fascinating to see Charlie on the stand. I think we're going to get another Alec Murdaugh moment. So if you have the opportunity to watch that one, tune in. And that's still not the craziest stuff that's happened this week, because now we have Delphi. And Delphi, pardon my French, is a shit show. You can't make this stuff up. So let's go back a little bit and talk about Delphi. And I'm going to just give you just a little, as brief a description as I can. Richard Allen is arrested for the murder of Liberty German and Abby Williams. And they are 13 and 14. They have a day off from school in February. It's a nice day, and they go for a walk in the local park. And they don't come back from that. When the family go to pick them up at the end of the trail, they don't show up. They start a search. The girls are found the next day across the river in a clearing, and their bodies have been staged. Now, this we know from early on. What we don't really know is how they're staged. They're strangely staged. One girl is naked. The other girl has on her clothes, and both of them have tree limbs laid over them in these geometric patterns that appear to be some sort of symbol. There's also a symbol in blood on one of the trees. So law enforcement has been investigating this case forever. This, again, has been almost 10 years that this case has been pending. And so last year, about a year ago, they announced that they have arrested a suspect, Richard Allen. Richard Allen is a local clerk at the pharmacy at the CVS or Walgreens, one of the two, and lives in the area, and had previously admitted, when questioned by police, that he had been in the park that day. So, oh, okay. I just saw a question starred, so I'm sure we'll get to that one, a question about Wendy Adelson and immunity. So we'll get to that. So they questioned Richard Allen. He doesn't really have an alibi. He admits he was in the park. And so all these years later, they arrest Richard Allen. He says, I didn't kill these girls. Yeah, I was in the park. I didn't kill them. The court decides, the prosecution comes to the judge and says, we're worried that we can't keep him safe with all the, because it's such a high visibility case. We're worried that we can't protect him in the local jail. We want him moved to the prison. So very unusual to move someone to a prison pretrial, but he is now in the prison. So his attorneys have tried several times to get him out of the prison because they feel like he's being mistreated there, to no avail. So just before CrimeCon, so late September, they file a 139-page motion for a Franks hearing. A Franks hearing is a hearing to attack the warrants that were served to search his property, and claiming that law enforcement lied in order to get the warrants. The motion is extremely detailed, and it also releases information that law enforcement has been withholding for all of these years. And that information has to do with the condition of the bodies and the fact that there are these geometric shapes, symbols that have been staged on the bodies. So now, of course, the defense knew this, but the public doesn't. So the defense says they've had a member of law enforcement, a former member of law enforcement who's now retired, who was involved in the investigation, who has come to them and said, you didn't get all the information because we investigated those symbols, and those symbols led us to believe that they were Norse symbols related to a religion called Odinism. Now, this sounds woo-woo. It sounds, a religious cult, everybody, I mean, it sounds like every bad crime book you've ever read. So everybody's pretty skeptical. But when the defense goes to see their client in the jail, the two law enforcement officers, the two jail staff officers, guards, who are responsible for taking care of Richard Allen and who are always there anytime that they are meeting with Richard Allen, are wearing patches on their uniforms that say, "In Odin we trust." Now, there is another piece to this. Odinism is a Norse religion. Norse believe in a pantheon of gods, and it is a Norse religion, and it is often practiced in the prisons in relation to white supremacy groups. And in many state prisons, it is recognized as a religion that is practiced by a group of people within the prison, the same as if they were Muslim or Catholic or Wiccan. So the law enforcement recognizes their right to worship as they choose. So now we have this connection between members of law enforcement and this group. And the defense attorneys discover that in the process of their investigation, they actually identified several people who were actively practiced Odinism, who at least at some level had a connection to either the scene or Abby and Libby. One of the guys admits he was on the scene. One of them's son was dating one of the girls. And so there are connections that are not that make it seem like, well, it's possible. I mean, is it the first sort of most logical thing you'd go to? Probably not. But there's a lot about the evidence that suggests that it was more than one person was involved, that it would have been very difficult for Richard Allen to take two young, healthy, and living girls across a river that was running fast in February and also was about 3 feet deep to the other side, and then subdue one while he murdered the other. I'm trying not to be super graphic, but let's face it, you can wrap your brain around how that would be difficult. So there's a lot to think about there. So the attorneys file this motion. The judge is not happy about it. The judge is not happy about the fact that they have released some information in this motion. And it's information that may have been the subject of a gag order that she had issued earlier in the case. So the judge is not happy about it, and there's some sort of wrangling going back and forth. Then it comes out that one of the two defense attorneys, now these defense attorneys do not share office space. They are in two separate offices. One of the defense attorneys had a longtime friend, someone who had previously worked in the office, come by his office and surreptitiously take photographs of crime scene photos that were in their war room, their area where they had all of the evidence for the case. And unbeknownst to the lawyer, this guy snapped pictures. He then shared them with a third party. That third party, who has been identified as M, then shared them with a YouTuber who is very interested in the case. The YouTuber promptly and rightfully so called law enforcement, said, "Whoa, I just got these. I don't want them. I don't want to be responsible for them. I want to give them back. And I want nothing to do with having these, because I know there's a gag order. And even if there weren't, these are not something that I want to be responsible for. This is not something I want to have possession of or have anyone think that I could be distributing." So law enforcement gets involved. They identify the person who actually took the photos. The person who passed them on committed suicide over it. So, I mean, it's been a horrible, horrible chapter in this case. So the judge, then, they're going to have a hearing. It originally was going to be a hearing, I think, on cameras in the courtroom. And it was the first hearing in Delphi that was supposed to be live streamed. And so everyone gets there for the hearing, and the judge calls the attorneys into her chambers and reads them the riot act over the release of these photos and says to them, "This is gross negligence, and your choice is either you withdraw or I take you out in the courtroom and publicly shame you for all of this." So the one attorney says, "I'll withdraw." The other one says, "I'll file a withdrawal." withdrawal. And the judge comes back out on the bench and says, we've had this new development. The attorneys have withdrawn, and we're not going to have a hearing today, and we'll reset something later after I've had a chance to appoint them new counsel. Well, then the attorneys get the opportunity to think about it and to talk to their client, and their client says, I don't want new attorneys. I trust you guys, and I understand that it wasn't your fault that those pictures got out, and I don't want to change lawyers. So the lawyers go back to the judge and say, we're not going to withdraw because Richard Allen has said he wants us. And the judge says, too bad, so sad, you're off the case. So then the lawyers go back and they file notices of appearance saying that they're appearing as private attorneys pro bono, which they're entitled to do. So they have a hearing today, and the judge says, I don't care whether you filed your notice of appearance. I've made a finding that you committed gross negligence, and I'm never going to let you represent Richard Allen. Well, there's so much wrong with that it's hard to even know where to start. First of all, the judge never held a hearing on the record. So in the meantime, the two lawyers who've been thrown off the case have filed a motion to disqualify the judge. So now the judge is saying, I'm not going to hear your motion because you don't have any standing because you're not on the case. And I'm not going to let you back on the case. Because if I let you back on the case, then I'm going to have to hear this motion to disqualify myself. I mean, it's a shit show. I don't know how else to describe it. So now they get there this morning and the judge says, no way, no how, I am not letting you back on the case. The new lawyers who've been appointed say, Judge, there's no way we could be ready for a trial. I think it's coming up in January. And so she sets the trial out till October of next year. So in the meantime, this judge has never held a hearing on the issue of disqualifying these lawyers. She has never made any findings on the record about them being grossly negligent. She has never made any sort of record of the reason why she coerced them, and they believe they were coerced into withdrawing. And she has refused to hear the motion about disqualifying herself. So it's a mess. It is an absolute mess. I do not think this is the end of it because I do believe that Richard Allen has a Sixth Amendment right to have the lawyers that he has a relationship with represent him. Now, there is no guarantee that the new lawyers are going to embrace the theory of the case that the current lawyers have. They may think that this whole business about Odinism is pie in the sky and they don't pursue it. So Richard Allen has the right under the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution to have the lawyer of his choice. Now, he cannot choose his public defender. That is a well-settled law that you don't get to choose your appointed attorney. They're appointed for you by the court. However, once you have a relationship with that lawyer, it should be like moving heaven and earth to get that lawyer off that case as long as the client wants them. So Richard Allen wants these two lawyers. And so now this issue is going to have to go up to the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to decide whether or not the judge is abusing her discretion in not allowing that. So it's all very interesting. It's very concerning that there is some corruption going on. I'm not going to say this judge is somehow involved with Odinism, but I think that it does raise reasonable doubt to say the officers who were tending to Richard Allen in prison and who Richard Allen claims coerced his confession, it's not out of the realm of possibility that that could have happened, and that's reasonable doubt. So it casts reasonable doubt on his confession. It casts reasonable doubt on whether somebody else could have done the crime. All of those things are things that are important for his lawyers to pursue. It's crazy. So now his lawyers, I mean, it even gets more interesting because the appointed lawyers now have an obligation to zealously represent their client. And if their client says, I don't want you, I want those guys, the newly appointed attorneys are going to have to help him file what he needs to file in order to get the issue of the his preferred attorneys before the Supreme Court, because they can't. They're off the case. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how the attorneys work together to try and get the outcome that Richard Allen wants, which is that he gets the attorneys of his choice, and how that's going to get in front of the Supreme Court. So it's been crazy. I'm ready to take some questions, and so I will let Michelle catch up. She's got a bunch of questions. She's got stars on them, so I'll let Michelle get caught up and post some questions. Thanks for sticking with me, because this has been a crazy week, and there are a lot of really interesting cases to cover. I have been trying. My manuscript is due by the end of the year, so I've been trying to write and to sort of refine what's going on there, get some chapters out to readers, and start that process. And I've been trying to follow the Markel case when I can. So I've had a little bit on my plate. Hi, Pam White Hasbrook. I do want to say, before I take this question, I do want to say thank you. I saw that there were quite a few super chats. I want to remind everybody that all your super chats go directly to our moderator, Michelle. And I want to remind you that Michelle's kind of going through a rough time right now. She's in the middle of chemo for blood cancer. And so if you have the ability to send a little love her way, I'd appreciate it a lot. Also, we have a PayPal link in the show notes, if that is a better way for you to show Michelle a little love. Pam White Hasbrook. Question: what was it about the Lori Vallow Daybell case that made you want to write about the case versus all the other cases you've seen in your career? This is a great question. I tend to be interested in cases that have the crime plus something. In the Daybell case, it was the layers of religious zealotry, religious delusions, the mental health issues, the issues of this sort of political religious movement happening in the LDS Church. All of those things made it even more interesting for me than the sort of run-of-the-mill, somebody killed their kids. Which unfortunately happens way too often. I'm kind of interested in the Markel case for the same reason, because it has to do with child custody and how family law and criminal law come together, and the sort of confluence of the pressures of divorce and family law, and getting sort of boxed into a corner and not being able to figure out any good resolution. So I'm sort of interested in that one, but it really was the whole issue of there being so many layers to the Vallow case, Vallow Daybell, that made it interesting for me. And it's been fascinating. And just when I think I sort of have my arms around it, then something else comes up, like all these people who are suddenly getting behind the movement. So it's been really fascinating. Sorry, I'm getting a little hoarse here. Hi, Jane Blackbird. Can you explain the amnesty Wendy Adelson has? Can she still be charged in the hit? This is a great question. We also know that Zulema Pastenis had some sort of immunity, and it's a similar situation. So in Wendy's case, she has been named as an unindicted co-conspirator. But here's something that is a little bit unique to Florida, and that's that if law enforcement wants to talk to you and they believe that you have information that may help them in a case, they can grant you functional immunity, meaning that what you tell them cannot be used against you. And then the prosecutor also granted Wendy immunity for her to come to court and testify. So what that means is anything that Wendy testified to in court cannot be used against her. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't other evidence that could prove she is guilty. So the evidence, the only thing that she cannot be prosecuted for, that cannot be used against her, are her words in court. So whatever she has testified to in court, if she were to make any admissions of guilt on the witness stand, those could not be used against her. But here's an example. They know from GPS data that Wendy drove down the street where Dan Markel lived. That was the house they had lived in together as a family. He stayed in the family home. And they showed an overhead view of this street, and the street kind of winds around. Wendy claims, when she was on the stand, she claimed that she went that way. She was on her way to lunch with friends, and she had to go buy liquor for a party and all this other stuff. And that when she used that street as a shortcut, but when she came around the corner, she saw that there were police cars and police tape up, and so she backed up and turned around and left. And she didn't know that the police activity was in front of Dan Markel's house because she couldn't see that far up the street. She didn't know what had caused the problem. Now, first of all, if there's police activity on the street that you live on, that your ex lives on, and that you're on a day when your ex has your children, which he did, he got up that morning and took the children to daycare and then went to the gym. And when he came back, he was shot. But Wendy didn't know that. I mean, she couldn't have known for certain that the children were at daycare. So first of all, she pulls up, there's a police blockade. She can't see what house is in question. And she backs up, turns around and leaves. That's her story. When they get the police on the stand, the police then say, no, the blockade was around a curve. She couldn't have seen the police blockade from where she says she turned around. But if she had gotten to the police blockade, she would have seen that the police activity was out front of Dan Markel's house. So that testimony conflicts. Well, they can't use Wendy's testimony that she showed up, backed up, and left, although she made that statement in other places. She probably has made that statement in other contexts that maybe could be used against her. They can bring the police data in that says, we see Wendy's car pull up, make a 3-point turn, and back up. And she had to, if she stopped at the police blockade, she had to have been able to see that the police activity was outside Dan Adelson's home. She didn't get out of the car, didn't contact the police, didn't rush over saying, oh my God, are my kids there? What is going on? That's my ex's house. She just turned around and left. Well, a lot of people speculate that she went to find out whether or not the deed had been done because they hadn't been able to get a confirmation from the gunman. So in that case, they could bring in that information about that they developed from her GPS. They might not be able to get in her excuse or her version of her testimony, but they would be able to still get in that information, and it's very damning. There is sufficient information. I think there is sufficient information to charge Wendy. Another thing that I thought was really fascinating was the fellow who she was dating at the time. His name is Jeff Lacoste. He believes she tried to set him up as the possible gunman. And one of the reasons why the hit had to be done on the day it was done was not only because Dan Markel was going out of town the next day, but Lacoste was going out of town the next day, and they wanted to be able to connect him. So kind of interesting. And I think I'm dying to see what Charlie's going to say tomorrow, and if he's actually going to get on the stand and lie through his teeth about there being an extortion plot. But the immunity that Wendy Adelson got does not preclude them bringing charges against her. And she and Donna Adelson, her mother, have both been named as unindicted co-conspirators. So I would be very surprised if one or both of them aren't charged, particularly if Charlie's found guilty, which I expect he will be. So good question. Trisha, you're in Cincinnati. One of my cross-country trips, my husband and I took our daughter and her best friend to Disney World. And we were coming back from Disney World, and our flight was canceled, and we ended up being redirected through Cincinnati. And I went up to the desk and talked to the folks at the reservations desk, trying to figure out an alternate. And I walked back to my husband and I said, so we're going to go through Cincinnati to get home to Portland, Oregon. And he looked at me and he said, Cincinnati? We don't know anyone in Cincinnati. So ever since then, it's been our family joke. Anytime anybody says Cincinnati, we all look at one another and go, but we don't know anyone in Cincinnati. So hope you're doing well, Trisha. Thank you for letting us know where you are. And I hope I'm going to encourage you to plan your route through Nashville the end of May. So Jill Schneider, are you following the Caitlin Armstrong case? And if so, what are your thoughts? I have not been. There are two trials going on right now, and there are not enough hours in the day for me to follow them both. So because Markel started earlier and I was interested in that case, I've been trying to follow that one, but there are just not enough hours in the day for me to write and to follow the Caitlin Armstrong case too. I hope at some point to get caught up with it, but I haven't been able to do it yet. One thing I wanted to bring to everybody's attention. Hi, Julie. When are we going to have lunch? And I'll answer your question. If Alan hasn't waived his rights, how can the trial be set out that far? I believe he has waived his right to a speedy trial because the trial date they had set for him was already a year out. He was arrested a year ago. So I think he has already waived his speedy trial. If I'm wrong about that, somebody let me know, but I think he has. So I want to point out that I am going to be on a bit of a vacation for the next couple of weeks. And so there will be no lives for the next couple of weeks. We'll put it out in the Facebook group and the community chat so everybody will be aware. But our next live will be November 22nd. We're going to draw for the quilt. Pointing the wrong way again. And we're going to be drawing for the quilt on November 22nd. And by then, I hope that I will have caught up on a couple of these trials. My husband and I are going to the Bahamas for a family wedding. For those of you who don't know, my husband's sister has lived in the Bahamas most of her life. She was a flight attendant who met a man from the Bahamas, and they were married, and she settled there with him. And so her family's in the Bahamas, and her granddaughter, who is actually the same age as my daughter, is getting married. So they were all here for our daughter's wedding earlier in the year, and so we're going there for their wedding. They're getting married on the beach in the Bahamas. So I'm looking forward to seeing our family down there. We have not seen them other than for my daughter's wedding. We have not seen them in quite a long time, pre-COVID. So we're looking forward to getting some family time with them. And, you know, it's just kind of an added perk that it happens to be in the Bahamas. So there's that. So we leave next week, and we'll be back later on, just before our next live on the 22nd of November. I'm also super excited about the fact that we're going to host Thanksgiving this year for a couple of folks that we met through the YouTube, and along with our lovely neighbors that we met when we moved into the neighborhood. And I'm excited about that. It's always hard to have Thanksgiving when there's just two of you, which we've done a couple times, but not very often. So I'm excited that we've got the holiday season coming up. We're headed to LA to spend the holiday season with our daughter and son-in-law and his family. And so it's a great time of year. And we're excited that we're moving into all those great things coming up. So Julie, reach out to me and let's schedule lunch. Rachel Gamber, Lori, I've been dying to ask you this. If Charlie Adelson is found guilty, what, if anything, happens to Wendy and Dan's boys? Does it give any more ammo to Ruth Markel's grandparent rights? So one of the things that I really wanted to delve into is the issue of grandparent rights in Florida, because it's a very state-specific area of the law. So in some states, grandparents do have some third-party rights. In other states, they don't. There's a very well-known U.S. Supreme Court case, Temple versus Granville, that really sets out when a third party can have custody or visitation rights over children. So it is an area that I really need to do some more research on. And I hope at some point there'll be a newsletter about that, because I use the newsletter to kind of do deep dives. At this point, as long as Wendy is not convicted, if Charlie is found guilty, that doesn't necessarily change Ruth Markel's rights. But if Wendy is charged and is found guilty, then the issue will be, where will the boys go? The question could be, the grandparents obviously would be trying to slug it out. If Donna Adelson is also implicated in this, it's probably going to be much easier, because the children no longer have an available custodial parent. If Wendy's in prison, then I think Ruth Markel would probably have a very good chance of getting custody of the boys. Now they live in Canada, so then there would be the question whether the Florida court would allow them to move to Canada, to allow the boys to move to Canada with their grandparents. But those are good questions. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. One of the reasons that Wendy and Ruth Markel got so sideways was Ruth Markel panicked a bit over the issue of what happens if Wendy gets arrested for this crime and Dan Markel is gone. Now what happens to these boys? And at the time that Dan Markel died, they were very young. They were 3 and 4. They're now 13 and 14. So she got a hold of And remember, the Markels are very observant, and they're very much within their Jewish community. So they got in touch with the Jewish Relief Agency in Florida, asking about the process for children going into foster care. They were frightened, and reasonably so, that if Dan Markel is gone, if Wendy gets arrested, if Harvey and Donna are implicated in the murders, the children could very easily end up in stranger foster care. And that's what Ruth Markel didn't want to have happen. So she reached out asking, what happens if? Can the children go into foster care with the Jewish Relief Society until I can get here to get the kids? And Wendy took that as, she wants my kids in foster care. She's making a play to get my kids, and cut off all contact with Ruth Markel. It wasn't until the trial, Katie Magbanaway's trial, and it came out that at her trial that the Markels had not seen the boys ever since, that Wendy finally relented and allowed them to have some time. And I think somebody testified today that the Markels have seen these boys about 3 times since the last trial. So I think it's very unfortunate. I think it's criminal, I think, for Ruth Markel to be denied, her and her husband to be denied contact with the children. And, I think this case is interesting because of the level of involvement of grandma. I think it borders on the Piketon case. They come from very different socioeconomic places, and yet it was the grandmother in the Piketon murders who wanted her grandchildren and was hell-bent on getting her son getting custody of them, to the point where they murdered 8 people. So I think that is the part of that case that interests me, is this families being involved to the point where they believe that's the only answer. They are so over involved. And I think a lot of the testimony that we heard today talked about the fact that even after Dan Markel's death, Charlie and Donna continued to meddle in Wendy's personal life. They continued to talk about who she was dating and whether or not they were appropriate to be around the boys, and whether or not, and I mean, they really did. They were deeply involved, and that came out in trial today, which was kind of fascinating. Sometimes stuff that comes out at trial is just juicy. Um, this is a case that I want to look into, Juliana. It's interesting because I know people down there. We've been visiting and with people, and I know lawyers down there. We've been visiting down there for the last 35 years, so I know people down there, and I'm excited to get down there and find out the real dirt on that case. And I think, I'm having such a hard time keeping all these names in my head, with trying to keep names in my head for the book. But I think her name is Shipley, or something along that line. So yeah. She's the one who had the lover, and they plotted a murder for hire that the police discovered before, and she is now on house arrest, because I am telling you what, you do not want to be in Fox Hill Prison, which is the only prison in the Bahamas, because it is horrible. It is basically, the bathroom is a bucket in the corner, and it is insect infested, and the food is horrible, and it's incredibly corrupt. And so I'm looking forward to looking into that one. And I know people who can put me in contact with folks that know what's going on. So that's another one I'm really interested in. Hey, Donaby. In the Vallow case, Judge Edmonds recused himself, but the Delphi judge isn't. Is that because of different states, Idaho versus Indiana law, or is the Delphi judge not following the law? The rule, regardless of what state you're in, is if you have a conflict of interest, if you cannot be fair and unbiased, you have to recuse yourself. So in the Vallow case, what happened was Kay and Larry Woodcock filed a guardianship action before they knew for certain where the children were. They believed that the children were alive and that Lori had hidden them somewhere in some bunker or they were in Hawaii. They didn't know. But they were concerned enough that they filed a guardianship action. And the reason they did it, and was on the advice of their Idaho attorney, the reason they did it was because once again, they did not want the children to end up in foster care. JJ's condition probably would not have done well being placed with strangers. And so they asked, give us guardianship so that if the children are removed from their mother, they can come directly to us. So they really didn't have any standing to ask for guardianship over Tylee, and she was almost 18. So, but they did ask for guardianship over JJ. So when they filed that action, that was what then finally led the judge to Judge Edmonds to issue the order telling Lori that she had to produce the children and prove they were okay. But what happened was when the children's bodies were found, Judge Edmonds was the magistrate. So at some point, he would have had to turn the case over to Judge Boyce anyway, because the magistrate doesn't hear felonies, only hears misdemeanors and lower level criminal actions. So it was inevitable, if they were charged with felonies, that the case would then have to go to a district court judge, to Judge Boyce. But until that time, up through the indictment, Judge Edmonds could have continued to hear the case. When the initial charges were filed, Mark Means, who at that point was representing both Lori and Chad, filed a motion to recuse Judge Edmonds, saying that he had already heard evidence in the guardianship case. Now, I think technically he did not have to recuse himself, but out of an abundance of caution and knowing that he wouldn't be keeping the case anyway, that would be passed off to the other judge, he went ahead and recused himself. It made sense. It was sort of the path of least resistance. They didn't have to have a hearing over it. And it really was kind of no harm, no foul, because he wouldn't have been overseeing the case beyond the indictments anyway. So beyond the arraignment. So the Delphi case is a little bit different because this judge has been hearing substantive motions in the case for quite a while, and is the judge who would continue to hear the trial if she's not recused. And I think that based on her conduct, not so much the conflict, but her conduct shows that she has a bias. And I think they rightfully have asked for her to be recused. And she's absolutely not having it. So they are inevitably going to end up in front of the Supreme Court to get those matters decided. The issue of their representation and the issue of recusing Judge Gull. In the meantime, she is still the judge on the case. Good questions tonight, guys. I love the fact that you guys don't ask the lightweight questions because we've all learned so much being together these last couple years. And so now, when you guys are thinking about things, you're asking the deep questions. It's not just, what's an indictment? Y'all know that. So what we're hearing instead are these kinds of finer points of law. And I hope you find it as interesting as I do, because it certainly makes me think and makes me stop and maybe look at things with a different perspective. And I appreciate that because that's the way we all learn. Chez la mère, using my high school French. One statement that no one, either prosecutors or defense, have brought up is when the two hitmen called Katie at noonish to say the job was done. She said, "I know." How did she know? Who told her? She knew because Wendy had already been there and seen all the police blockade. And that was the point that the prosecutor made, was that um, they were concerned because they hadn't heard from the gunman, so they didn't quite know what was going on. And when he called, Katie said, "I know." The reason she knew is because Wendy drove by there and Wendy told Charlie, Charlie told Katie, because that's the way the communication worked with either from Donna to Charlie to Katie, or from Wendy to Charlie to Katie. Never back the other direction, only in the one direction. But the point the prosecution made was that there wasn't any way that that they could have known, except that Wendy was there and saw the police blockade, realized the police were there, and turned around and left. So, good question. The Markel case is juicy. There are a lot of those little details. Hi, Leah. Didn't one of Alan's new attorneys say he thought the PCA was strong before he represented him? I've heard this, but I haven't actually seen it. I heard that he had done an interview at one point with media. Of course, media are clamoring to talk to anybody who will talk to them about the case. So obviously, the defense attorneys who are assigned to the case are not going to talk about the case. So they're going to go and say, "Hey, we got any other defense attorneys who know the lay of the land, who know the judge, who know the players involved, who can give us their insight?" And so I'm sure that's what they did. And they did an interview with him. And he said he thought that the probable cause affidavit, the information that was in there, was strong. I don't think I agree, but I also disagree because I think I think it is very possible that the only link Richard Allen has to the case is a weathered, unspent bullet, an unspent round of ammunition that was found in the vicinity of the bodies. Now, if you read all 139 pages of the Frank's motion, which I did on the airplane on the way to CRIMECON, if you read that, they point out that bullet was found under leaves and duff. It was clear that it was not just lying on the surface between the two bodies. It was under things, under fallen leaves and detritus that was on the ground. And it was clear from the appearance of the round that it had been there a while. It wasn't new and shiny. So the only connection that they had was they went the probable cause. So let's talk about the difference. A probable cause affidavit for his arrest on the murder charges is different than the affidavit that was used to get the search warrant to search his home. So what the Franks hearing is attacking is the affidavit to get the search warrant, because they're saying that the law enforcement did not disclose that there were other theories of the case and that there were other potential suspects when they asked the judge to issue that warrant to go search his house. When they searched his house, they found a gun that took the kind of ammunition that they had found at the scene. Now, what they said was that round had been run through the action in Richard Allen's gun. Now, I'm here to tell you that defense attorneys all across the country are actively challenging extractor mark evidence. And it is probably one of the worst junk sciences that we have right now. In one case, they took 100 guns of the same model and 100 bullets that had never been through the action of a gun. And they ran a bullet through the action of each one of those guns. And then they mixed up the bullets and handed them to an expert and said, tell me which one of these bullets came from which gun. And they could not do it. The reason they could not do it is because the extraction marks don't, the extractors in guns don't have their own fingerprint the way that the rifling inside the barrel of a gun would. Because the rifling inside the barrel is impacted every time you fire a round through the gun. And that changes the terrain inside the gun, the explosion and the friction and the force of that bullet coming out of the barrel of the gun changes the fingerprint on the slug, but also inside the gun. That is not the case on extractors, because extractors come from the factory. The mechanisms that move that bullet through the workings of the gun and then eject it without firing, they're all the same. And so it is very difficult to identify this extractor, this gun this bullet was run through this gun. I thought that was some of the weakest information in the Murdaugh case, because not only did they not have the gun, they had to extrapolate that. So they had to extrapolate it from rounds they found that had been fired. I mean, I thought it was some of the weakest evidence they had connecting the gun to Alec Murdaugh. To the 3 different guns that he had bought for his sons. So I don't think that lawyer, to get back to Leah's question, since I went down a rabbit hole, I don't think that attorney should have been commenting on the evidence. And I do think that potentially could be a conflict for him. If he is commenting on the evidence prior to being assigned to the case and having enough information to have commented and said, well, I think they have a strong case. Yeah, I'd be concerned about that. And it may be disqualifying for him. So that's a good question. And it's going to, this whole case is going to be so interesting to see how it all comes out, because at the heart of it, Richard Allen is put, as Richard Allen sits right now, he is an innocent man. It is potential that he is wrongfully accused. I mean, I think there is a possibility that he has been wrongfully accused. And if there is a possibility that he's been wrongfully accused, that's reasonable doubt. Hi, Beth. This is a good question too. What about the girl's cell phone recording of him saying girls down the hill? So what we have seen of that cell phone here recording is a very blurry figure of a male, presumably, with his hands in his pocket. That is the only thing we have seen. And we have heard that that person said, "Guys down the hill." There is no concrete evidence that that is Richard Allen. I am certain that they have had that video enhanced 17 ways from Sunday, but man, if I were defending him, that would be the first thing I would say. You show me how you made a positive ID. And if they're going to say, well, we found a Carhartt jacket in his house that matches that, I'm going to pull out, I'm going to say, and really, how many other people in northern Indiana own a Carhartt jacket? So I have never thought that and the sketches that were made of some of the law enforcement sketches that were made from some of the witnesses who saw people in the park, none of that really goes to being a positive identification. So all we know is that there was a blurry male figure who at some point said, "Guys down the hill." And that's all we really know. It could be any number of people who were there in the park. And I certainly would not hang a positive identification on that video. So, but law enforcement is saying, "Oh, we've got him dead to rights. That's him." I'm not so sure. I think that's a pretty. I mean, if you take a look at that recording and those still shots, I don't think most people could recognize it if it was their own husband or father. They're not positively. So not a very strong case then, Crash D. In my opinion, no. I do not think that they have a strong case against Richard Allen. And I think, I mean, we haven't seen the state's entire case, but based on what was in their probable cause affidavit and based on what I read of the defense's motion and their contention that there are people out there who investigated a complete other theory to this case, that's reasonable doubt. And so, no, I don't think they have a strong case. And I don't think they get a conviction. And I'm telling you, if if they decide that there was not probable cause for the warrant to search his house to find the gun, to connect it with the bullet, their case is demolished. And that is the reason why the state is fighting so hard to get that, to keep that in. So. What about his several confessions? So my understanding is that he confessed in a single phone call to his wife. He said it more than once. He says that he was threatened by these warden guards who are "in Odin we trust," who told him that if he did not confess on the phone to his wife, where it could be recorded, that his wife and daughter would be killed. Now, that's what the motion says. Is it true? I don't know. Once again, we get reasonable doubt from it, though. Because the rule with a confession is that if a person makes a confession, there has to be something to corroborate the confession. And I don't know at this point that we have much in the way of corroboration that would support his confession. Why is he in prison, not convicted? So many shady moves. I agree at this point. The judge found that there was reason to move him from the local jail to the prison. And the state contended it was because they couldn't keep him safe because there was so much media attention and what have you. But, they were concerned for his safety. Well, they managed to get him into a jail with a couple of guards who trust in Odin. So I don't know. Um, I I I find all of it quite concerning. Angel baby, how long do you think it'll be till Donna gets arrested? I think if Charlie is convicted, you're going to see Donna and very likely Wendy both arrested. I think the evidence against Wendy is a little less um, persuasive because they don't have the phone intercepts between her and Charlie that they have between Donna and Charlie. But I think that they can make the connection that she at least knew after the fact that they had been involved. And I think it's interesting that they also, that she also, when they found her, brought her into the police station, told her Dan had been murdered. They found her in a restaurant where she was meeting with friends, apparently. When they found her and brought her into the police station, they asked her, "Do you know of people who would want to do this?" And she started saying, "Well, God, I hope it wasn't my family." So, I mean, from the beginning, I think she at least had suspicions and was was able, may be able to corroborate some of the other things. I think there's a potential that Wendy will turn on her family because she's got kids to raise. And I think that when she looks around at whether she's going to cut mom and Charlie off or whether she's going to go to prison and uh, not be around for her boys, I think there's a possibility she may turn on them. She may turn on mom. Tennis girl, no such thing as a stupid question. Maybe stupid question. What would local law enforcement have done if Donna had gone to the police about the bump? That is an interesting question. I think they were pretty confident that she wouldn't go to local law enforcement about the bump. But I think if she had, that would have been that would have been telling evidence too, because the average person who's not involved in a murder for hire is going to say, "Holy cow, I'm going to go to the police because not only has my poor son-in-law been murdered, but now they're trying to extort money out of me and accuse me of being involved." So yeah, if she had gone to local law enforcement, I'm certain that they would have pulled the FBI in because they were on her. I mean, the Adelsons were on local law enforcement radar as well. But yeah, it's interesting to think about. We're coming up on the 2-hour mark, so let's take a few more questions and we'll wrap it up for the evening. Two lefty Jews. Question: what do you think happened to Tammy Daybell if Chad didn't directly kill her? Well, we know that Alex Cox was his GPS phone data put him at the church in the church parking lot about a mile and a half away. So either he parked his car in the church parking lot and left his phone there and walked down to Chad Daybell's house and helped him and did the deed because Chad couldn't, or he was there as backup in case Chad chickened out. Either way, he was close by, and it's possible that he did it. Um, but I think that if Chad didn't do it, he was present when Tammy was killed. And Tammy had bruises on her arms that the coroner said were fresh. They were not bruises that were healing. They were freshly inflicted bruises. And they were certainly consistent with someone holding her down while they suffocated her. So My theory is that Chad did it, but that Alex was there as the backup. And my theory that Chad did it is because Lori was in the background saying, by God, I already took care of my business. You go take care of your business. And don't make my brother do it. Although she made her brother do it too. So I don't know. One way or the other, either Alex was there and helped or he was there as backup. So good, Lori. Do they have any real evidence against Richard Allen then? No, they don't. There's no DNA. There's no other connection that he has to this crime other than the fact that he admitted he was in the park that day. And he may have a resemblance to a blurry picture on a video recording. As far as I know now, the state may have much more evidence that they are withholding and that they are not making public. It seems a little, I would be very surprised at that because of the amount of detail that was in the defense motion that was filed and the level of information that came out there. But I mean, it's possible that they have more information, but with what we know right now, I would say no. The only connection is that gun and the bullet. A gun was not used in the commission of the crime. Neither girl were shot. And so why would there be a gun there? Well, they said, well, he probably used it to threaten them, to control them, to point the gun at them and make them do what he wanted them to do. Okay. But I think the connection to the bullet is pretty tenuous. And as far as I know, that is really the only link they have. When they did they served the search warrant at his home, they found clothing similar to the clothing that the guy was wearing on the bridge, but it was a blue Carhartt jacket and a baseball cap. I mean, there are thousands of people who probably could have been in that park at the same time who own blue Carhartt jackets and black baseball caps. So I don't know that there is a lot of connection, a lot of concrete evidence to be had against Richard Allen. And I think that's why his defense attorneys are fighting so hard for him, because I don't think they believe that there is any concrete evidence against him that proves that he committed the murder. And I think that they believe, right or wrong, that somebody else did it. And if they can bring enough doubt to a jury that somebody else did it, Richard Allen may be found not guilty. Will the state be concerned if Donna and Wendy, maybe is the state concerned that Donna and Wendy will leave the US? Possibly, although I suspect because they're unindicted co-conspirators, they're already on everybody's watch list. And if they were to try and leave the US, they wouldn't probably get very far. Let's remember that Spring and Blaze Tibido didn't get across the Canadian border because they were on a watch list. They were stopped at the border because they had a bolo out on them. So I think it would be pretty difficult for them to leave the country at this point. Good questions, though. And I'm certain that they have been ordered not to leave the country. So don't forget the raffle quilt. And don't forget to show Michelle a little love if you can. We appreciate so much all she does for our channel. And I appreciate so much what she does for my channel, our channel. I want to thank everybody. As usual, the chat has been fascinating. I see one more question. Chad's kids were home. Where were they? Garth was in the bedroom across the hall from Chad, but they reported, and it's interesting because I just listened to this part of the trial testimony today as I was writing. Garth and Chad both reported that Tammy had been sick earlier in the night, that she'd gotten sick, that she vomited, that she wasn't feeling well. So they reported that, and so it's possible that if Garth heard anything, he thought, oh, mom's still not feeling well, she's just gone in the bathroom or whatever. So it's possible that he just attributed that to she's not feeling well if he heard anything. But he was in the house and was in the bedroom across the hall. Good questions. I want to thank everybody again. As usual, our chat is amazing. Great questions, great comments, great rapport that you all have with one another. It's so fun. I want you to know I read the chats. I can't do it while I'm doing this, or I can't walk and chew gum at the same time, or do that, rub your belly and pat your head thing. But I do read them, and I love the fact that everybody in the chat is so friendly and supportive, and that we very rarely have any conflict in our chat. We very rarely have any harsh words or disagreement, and I appreciate that so much. I love the fact that y'all keep it classy. I love the fact that we can all ask questions and ruminate about things and think about things and still respect and get along with one another. So I appreciate that so much. I know Michelle keeps things running, but she couldn't do it if you all weren't so great to work with. So thank you for being here tonight. Don't forget, we're going to be off for the next couple of weeks. We'll post it in all the usual places so you'll know. But I will see you back here on the 22nd when we are going to draw for this quilt. 2 hours did just fly by. It always does with you all. So I enjoy it so much. I will see you in a couple weeks. Have a great couple weeks. I know we're all going to be getting ready for Thanksgiving by the next time we chat. And so y'all be safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk again in a couple weeks. Good night, everybody.